The way I think our language is just fading away. I'd see some little Indian kids, I try to talk to them. I don't know what you're saying. I said, you don't understand? I said, no. So they hired me to go to St. Ignatius to teach Indian language. Sometimes I get mad. They couldn't talk just as good as I am. Their folks are just as Indian as I am, but they didn't.
Welcome to Podcast IRC, conversations with Indigenous scholars to advance understandings and gain new knowledge, hosted by the Indigenous Research Center at Selish Kootenai College.
So that's why at a certain time I get mad. And sometimes I say, no, I'm going to teach. See what will happen later on. If they want to be like that, it's okay. There's a lot of them I told me, you're never going to change your color. You're going to be brown, you're going to be black, you're going to be red, whatever. I said, you're never going to change it. You're going to be like that all your life. But try and keep what you are. Mm-hmm. You're Indian, stay Indian. Mm-hmm. But a lot of them don't want to be.
All right, so that was a little short clip from Agnes Vanderburg. So Agnes Vanderburg was a pretty prominent person around here in the times of I guess you could say change, when things were kind of turning over from the 50s. So she was part of a big movement here to bring back the older ways and bring back a lot of the teachings that she picked up along the way. She was born around 1901, and she was born right here in Valley Creek. It's just north here of Arlee, and she took this opportunity to take what she knew and just spread it around everywhere. She was kind of one of those people who was not too concerned about who she was sharing knowledge with. She just wanted to make sure that this knowledge was passed on and kept and recorded and in some manner. And in that little clip, she's talking about something that's kind of important even today. So this little clip was from, I believe, 1979, and she's talking about the struggle she has with hearing the young kids not being able to understand her or understand the language. And she continues to talk about getting hired to teach in the school and how she doesn't really get why some of the kids who she was teaching, whose parents were just like her, and they didn't know how to speak the language. And so she's just kind of talking about her struggles with that and her kind of desires to keep that language alive and some of the struggles. So this kind of brings up a really important topic. Even today, we see that same struggle today with the older folks today, even the ones who are deeply involved with language revitalization, this struggle or I guess I should say how to get people excited about learning, how to come up with a way that seems to be better in line with kind of our traditional pursuits and even some of our more modern pursuits. So now that we're getting a chance to dive a little deeper into this topic, we have the folks from the Language Conservancy back again, and hopefully we can kind of dive deeper into some of the work they've been doing, and in particular kind of maybe tackle this first kind of question that I have, and maybe some other folks have the same question. But really, how do we utilize what really just the state of what we're in? How do we really utilize that to capture the biggest audience and to get them to sustain themselves, really to to motivate themselves to want to move forward. And we did talk about that a little bit with these language groups where one catches on and the rest want to follow suit. But what are some other ways and some other methods that you've seen or experienced in your work and the time with the Language Conservancy? Let us know some of those details if you have them. Go ahead, jump right on in there,
All right.
partner.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in.
There you go.
This is Will May. I'm the executive director of the Language Conservancy, and listening to Agnes, I was thinking to myself, she was, ringing the alarm bells in some ways, 40 years ago, trying to get people to recognize the situation before it was too late.
Yeah.
And, there have been other leaders like her, in every community, trying to ring those alarm bells in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they got traction and sometimes they didn't, and it's always, scary as, more and more of the speakers pass on and fewer of them are there. And eventually you're looking around and there's just a handful left. And, you begin to really wonder, is this possible? Can we turn it around at this point?
Yeah.
And there was, in some ways it's like, a jet plane that's in a dive, right?
Yeah.
And we need to do everything we can to pull that thing out of a dive. And that dive means getting it out of the dive means getting real speakers speaking again, right? And then and eventually that more second language speakers are being produced, then we're losing speakers who are first language speakers, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the goal for, I think, every program out there is trying to figure out how do we get those numbers up of young people able to be proficient and eventually fluent in their language as a thing. And so there's a lot of, logistics, so to say, to get to that point. It's a team effort. We say, and it's not just, there's not just one immersion school that can do it or one program or whatnot. This has to be an effort across, school districts and families and everything like that. And it does take a movement to turn that around. But also to, kind of create a vision of what is this going to look like down the road? Like, let's say, we know working with communities that everyone's at a different place with their language revitalization process. I mean, if you look at the Maori or Hawaiians, for example, that's 40 years down the road for a lot of communities to get to that place, right?
Yeah.
And their problems don't stop either. They've got a whole slew of problems that, we can't even imagine, right? Because we're not even there yet. But everyone's got to start somewhere, and you've got to, start going down that path of revitalization. But, in the end, it all comes down to the same thing. It's all about numbers. How can we get more speakers, going? And then how do we make it so that those speakers that we train as second language or even as immersion first language raise their kids in that language too? It's a generational process. And this is going to take generations to get through. And it's not, it's not a guarantee that every community can do this. We were talking before the show about community in North Dakota where the last speaker died, and how difficult it is to, continue the work. Just having a list of words isn't enough. You need conversations, you need grammar. How do you teach advanced stuff? How do you talk about idioms? That subtle part of language, the jokes, humor. There's so much, beauty, depth, and fine-grained things that are happening in language. And how do we maintain and preserve that? And how do we maintain the continuity of that? These are big questions. I'm not saying Language Conservancy has all the answers. No, this is a problem that is worldwide.
You don't? That's what we brought you on for.
Well, what are we doing? What are we doing here?
A bit of a depressing tone right now. But anyway, there are lots of there's a lot of solutions out there. And we have some ideas. So I'll throw one out there. You guys want?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah.
So one of the things we'd like to see, and we talked about this maybe last week, often we have learners that become really proficient, and then they're into their language and they want to continue doing it, but then they don't have opportunities to speak with their peers.
Right.
And we think, wouldn't it be great if there was like a housing development or something that was called like a language village or something like that, where you get really everyone's there, and you can get it multi-generational. But the only rule of this kind of nice housing development you would do is that everyone has to speak the language when you're there,
right?
And you can then get a place there, and you create basically like a language village, like a language nest, where it's a safe place to be a speaker and to raise your kids in it. And because we're surrounded by the world of English. You go to work and you got to use English. You go to school, you go to the store. How do you start creating these spaces where the language can be used again? Right?
Yeah.
In Crow, it's still spoken. You go into the grocery store and into the gas stations. You're going to find that, but that's going to start dwindling around. So we need to figure out how to create those safe places. Aaron, you were talking about, Pentecostal church. There's other community places where people can still, have a safe place to do that. We need to create more of those.
Yeah. The way that let's clarify. So I wasn't preaching or anything to Will. I wasn't like, well, Will, before we get started here, have you accepted the Lord as like I wasn't doing that. I was talking about how among the Pentecostal community in Crow, it seems that a lot of them are Crow speakers, which is kind of contrary to a lot of other places where the Christian movement doesn't believe in using that language and stuff. But for some reason in Crow, that, man, if you want to learn to speak Crow, you go hang out with the Pentecostals, and you'll learn it. So that's what I was talking about. So let the record reflect, I was not trying to preach.
Background behind that, or why that is the case with
it all started. Now we get historical right here. A lady named Nellie Stewart and Harold Carpenter, they brought in the Pentecostal movement, and at the time, I think to reach more people, they chose to continue to speak in Crow, and it just kind of created almost like the Crow version of what Christianity is that you speak Crow, and there's like a whole culture around Crow Christianity, which is different than like Christianity anywhere else, And in Crow, they call them Oilers, like Oilers, the ones who use oil. So people would joke around and they'll call them greasers or call them oilers or something, but that's what it is. The ones who use oil, And man, it's hard to explain. Tim McCleary wrote his master's thesis on Crow Pentecostalism. So,
really?
Yeah.
That kind of lends. Oh, I'm sorry. Was you done?
No, I was done. I didn't want this to turn into a Crow Pentecostal episode. That should be its own episode later.
Okay. We'll do that. So, that lends to the idea that we had chatted about before. I don't know if it's this past one, but we talked about, these pockets where language does exist. And generally it's associated with in some spiritual context. Like, for example, around here, we talked about the wakes and funerals, where you can catch a little bit of the language spoken and go to a funeral. And I think the same is true if you want to catch a little bit of the language, especially in the songs and the hymns. Well, you go to Christmas, go to the midnight mass, and you can hear some of the hymns in the language. So I think that kind of lends to that. And why that happened, I'm not too sure. It's just been a part of the historical past, I guess, and the way it's progressed. But you know what? Hey, we got someone on today as well. Let's not forget that. But we've got one of our faculty awardees for this year's research award, which is given to SKC faculty and adjuncts to help them in their research pursuits, in particular in things that are aligned with the Indigenous Research Center's mission. So we've got with us today Aspen Decker, who's an adjunct faculty in the what would you classify yourself as? Language program? What is it? Let us know. What do you got?
NASD language specialist, I guess.
Oh, specialist.
Or I guess
nice.
Not specialist, language teacher.
No, I like that. Just roll with it.
Yeah, let's go with specialist.
Let's go with specialist. I like that. So, I mean, you've been on your own language journey that's seen some quite a bit of success, and maybe you can help answer the question or add to Will and Bob's work on what your journey was and kind of where you're at, and what your thoughts are on how do we get this language fired up among the people.
Oh no. So I think thinking about like the prehistoric context of kind of like what happened through historical trauma, that's like kind of where we need to look first, is like what were those issues. And like a lot of our elders that gone to boarding schools, the language was forbidden and we weren't able to speak it. And so that was problematic for the perpetuation of Salish language. So a lot of these families are yayas, are tupias. They didn't end up talking to their kids. And so it kind of scared them as well, because it was like, all right, well, we need to live in this contemporary world. And it's like a forbidden thing to talk our language. And it wasn't something to be proud of. And so a lot of the elders didn't end up teaching their children. But then I think that they kind of realized that they needed to be teaching the language. And so I think it started to get more passed down in the younger generations. And so it ended up skipping like 3 to 4 generations. But I think that we're kind of learning from like their trial and error. They've had a lot of fails of being a little too harsh when they taught Salish. And so like my mom's and like kind of that 50-year-old age range, they were just too harsh on them. It was like, oh, you either say it right or get out of here, like so so they had to talk right. And that was kind of a turnoff for a lot of people. They were like, well, why should I try to learn when they're just so mean and they ain't encouraging it. And so it was like that, and that's why it kind of pushed a lot of people away. And then Patalik Papier kind of talked about how they realized how harsh they were being on all these new learners. So they decided, oh, we need to be nicer and just try to like let them talk. And I think that it almost made it a little too nice, because then a lot of people started to just talk very Englishy, like the phonology, the sounds of the language wasn't being articulated correctly. And so I think we just got to kind of learn from that. And it's like, you could teach how to say it correctly. You don't have to, I think, say it like in a really mean way. It's not like say it right. It could be just repeat it and make sure that they're articulating it right. Explain these sounds and how you say it, in an authentic way. And so that's what I try to do now as a language teacher. I taught at Head Start for 7 years and at St. Ignatius High School for a year. And that really helped me realize, how do we bring this ancestral knowledge into these like contemporary times? And so I just made up a lot of like fun interactive games, and then thinking about like how do we keep the main concepts and this like integrity of what we want to teach in the classroom. So just like coming up with ideas of like, all right, well, I'm going to teach the bison hunt, for example. I created a game that was about our bison hunt. And so it was like, all right, well, the Salish people, we were in the Bitterroot and we had to get to the plains. And so it's like, well, to get there, it takes a lot of time and effort to get over the mountains. And so I have like the class walk around the classroom a couple of times. So you're being really interactive and having fun with it. And then I chose 4 different hunters. And so they were kind of like the captains of the game. And then the rest of the class was the bison. And so I taught them the different processes of hunting. And so it's like, well, what do you got to know when you go and get your bison? So for Salish people, it's like you got to give thanks. That's the first thing you do after you kill the animal. And so I incorporated like Indian sign language too. So they had to like make that bow and arrow hunting sign to like kill the animal. And then they would give thanks with their hand gestures and then say the Salish word as well. And then it's like, all right, well, if you don't take the hide off the bison right away, then all the meat goes bad within 4 hours. And so it's a way to like incorporate real knowledge, real like things that we have to do to process these animals. And so it's like, get that hide off, gut it out right away. And then it's like, all right, now you got to cut up the meat, you got to dry it, and then put it away for the winter, and then like scraping the hides. And so they have this like 5-step process that they had to say Salish words, and then they had to like make sure that they did it. Otherwise, the bison were able to be like, "Oh, I'm alive again," and then they kind of run off. And so,
that's cool.
Yeah, so with the most bison wins.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was just a really cool way to teach, indigenous knowledge through like a fun and interactive game. And I think another thing to kind of realize is that like these high schoolers and all these kids, they are just kids and they need our guidance. And so culture is all taught, it's all learned behavior. And so we just got to know that like, even though things have adapted and a lot of kids are just busy on their social media, they still need to focus on our culture, and like having that time is really important. And I think it's great that we do have some Salish teachers and Eneas teachers. And I think that is like the best platform for us to be able to be like, all right, well, you guys are in this class and now it's time to put your phones down and you're going to listen because you need to learn about your identity. And then also thinking like, all right, these guys are all about their phones though. So as long as they give me like a half an hour of quality time, just really listening to Salish and repeating it. And then I'm like, if you guys all know these 10 words within the half an hour, I'll give you like a 10-minute phone break or something. And so that kind of helped. They're like, all right, I'll listen. And then they got it down. And then I was like, all right, it's time for a break. And I think that really helped.
Yeah. That we had this proposal in one of our discussions was, we really ought to bring back, and this way was really effective, really, really effective. We ought to bring back, like, get a bunch of old nuns and bring back a boarding school, like a reverse
the reverse boarding school.
Hey, you guys are not far off at all. The only language that's ever been brought back was Hebrew, right?
Oh, I mean, they're the most successful language story ever, right?
Really?
Right.
Really?
And they did it just as you said. They didn't call them boarding schools. They called them language houses and kibbutzes. But in the 50s and 60s, the kids were separated, 40s, 50s, and 60s. The kids were separated from their parents who were speaking, German, French, English, Russian, and were raised in a language house by a second language learner of Hebrew. Wow. And so they were raised in an institution, right? Like that. Yeah. And then when they left, they were, full-blown speakers of Hebrew. And that's how they got the whole country speaking Hebrew.
Did they whip them?
I don't know what they did.
We have to find out. That seems like an effective or a deterrent. I don't know.
They all had to like work in the gardens and in the fields. It was in the kibbutz thing. Yeah, it was not wasn't a picnic, that's for sure. I think.
I got this. Oh, go ahead. What's up? Say it.
Me?
No,
nothing. Nothing. I didn't.
What was you doing? Swallowing? What's going on?
I was rolling my eyes. You heard it.
Oh,
no, I'm just kidding.
No. So I got this thing, and it's really it's like this far off. It becomes even a further like a further dream when I think about it, because I hear a reoccurring theme whenever we talk about language and these things. They're always situated in some institutional schoolhouse type of setting, and this is what we got. That's the reality. But my thoughts and my hopes and dreams are that it would be something different. And I'm really interested if the Language Conservancy folks or Aspen on the podcast here has that same dream, or has seen examples of where that works, where we're not teaching, things in subjective, or not subjective, but in siloed manners. Like today we'll learn about, the history of the tribe, but we're going to do it in the language. Then we're going to do math in the language. So everything's segmented into these areas of learning, where it can be just I don't know, seems like weird, but like an organic type of learning. I don't know. Yeah. You guys get what I'm saying?
No, I know what you mean. It would be called a language medium school, so that means that all the subjects are in that language. Yeah. And curriculum has to be developed, but you need the teachers to do that. That's one of the things we don't have. It's one of the biggest bottlenecks is enough qualified teachers to teach.
Shandine, were you were referring to something other than that, though, right?
Well, yeah, I mean,
structure.
So where the term school doesn't come into, when we think school, we think, these subject matters and a building kids go into with four walls.
That's actually
go ahead.
That's actually exactly what I've been thinking for the last few years, is that we do need to make at least a building or something that has our values and our architecture, where it's like either a longhouse or something. I think taking a look at like the Kalispell model, they have a language nest. And so their kids, like almost all of them, get to go to this language nest in school for the morning part of the day. And then the rest, they go back to like the public schools. So I think that's really cool. And I thought that if we had like these Salish teachers that are in our public schools, it'd be great to at least have a classroom where you could like kind of take away the four corners of the classroom and just try to make it more of like a teepee type thing. And I think that all these reservation schools, they should have the option to send your kids through like this language cultural classroom that also has like Western integrations, but as well as being able to be taught kind of in the language, and having a time that's specifically for teaching our ways of knowing and our indigenous pedagogies for teaching kids, and using like oral stories, and not just being like, all right, these are the colors and these are how you count to 10 in Salish. Like those are things that just haven't worked in the past. And what's it really teaching our kids is what I always tell teachers is, by the time they're high schoolers, is all they could say about their people and their language is, oh, I know how to count to 10 in my language and I know colors. It's like, that's not what they need to know. They deeper our actual identity and like what it is to be Salish and, our culture.
Yeah.
So I think on its own.
Maybe Bob was going to say something though. Were you going to say something, Bob?
No, go ahead. I was just thinking about what she was talking.
We're not bullying you, Bob, are we?
Not yet.
Okay.
Do you guys feel bullied? No.
Do you feel bullied?
He knows.
Are you targeted? Are we triggering anything? No. Okay.
Okay.
No, I guess what I was going to say was, at some point, though, we can't subcontract the duties of a tribe to any academic institution. We just can't do it. And I think we seem to rely heavily on this idea that the schools have to be on board in order for something to be successful. And yeah, it's nice when the school supports the ideas of a community, but man, I just don't see success in that yet. I don't see. What I see is when the community takes the initiative to make it work, that's when it works. And many times I see the excuse that it's like, well, the schools are obligated to teach these languages. Yeah, but at the same time, so are you. You know what I mean? So is your mom and your grandma. You guys have to learn it too. If we're holding the school districts up to the standard of every school needs to have Indian education and language, well, that applies to your home as well.
Yeah.
You know, we can't.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. And I was thinking about that when we were talking about a little bit about the dictionary that I'm working on last week, and also linguistics and how it's as this is really, does it really teach the language? Does these having these words in a dictionary, how much does that really advance literacy of the language or oral literacy of the language? And it's just one tool. It's just one little tool, and it really has to be there. The dictionary has to be as correct as it can be, and but it's just one little cog in a machine. That has to be there. The schools have to be there, but the community has to be first. I mean, just like Aspen was to all and Shandine, these things are just I learned how to count to 10 in my language. Great, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anybody any good. But that kind of fundamental count to 10 needs to be there. But the social, learning how to speak socially in your language somehow outside of the school environment has to be there too. I learned English reading stories that didn't necessarily have to do with my immediate culture of growing up in central Indiana. There was all these, animal stories and whatnot. I mean, I think we need all of that, and we need to talk about, just to shoot after you get out of school and talk about something,
one of the things that makes me think of
the context you get it in is going to be good,
Yeah. Well, so I was just going to jump in there. All right. So it didn't work very well.
Break us up.
So no. Just that idea of like maybe the trouble with or maybe a part of the trouble with trying to think about having the school do stuff. This idea that like kids learn English in schools. Well, I mean, I guess I would say that you learned how to read by reading those things, or you learned how to write. You came to school already knowing English.
Right.
They have English subjects, and there's maybe like a little bit of vocabulary you get along the way, but most of the language, I think, I mean, and maybe this is just my perspective, I think that my parents and my family and my friends taught me to speak English. I don't think that my English teacher did it. They taught me rules about how I should use it. Right, exactly. So, I mean, I think that definitely it would be great to have culture and language, and for students to like see a part of their identity reflected in the regular school systems. That would be great. I'm sure their experience would be that much better. But I do think that there's something to this, that if we try and place all of that there, then, I mean, we're almost reducing this thing to like the math lessons you learn, the history lessons you learn, and the context is so totally different. It shouldn't be something that is peer reviewed and published in a journal, right? It doesn't have, I mean, you can fit it there, but it's really out of place. So this kind of idea about having a community context, having a family context, I mean, that's what I imagine would have a huge difference, or make a huge difference.
Yeah.
If that,
I agree. You know what? I think just going all the way back to Will's comment about, there are some, I think, some foundational things that we need. We need teachers, even if that teacher is in the context of a public school structure, some tribally derived public education structure, or maybe even something different. I think that the fact remains, or the reality is, we need teachers, someone to teach, no matter how that mode of teaching is. And among that, we also need content for those teachers to utilize, whether that's a book, whether that's something they pick up in their own learning about how to teach, but we do need material. And I see this idea that, that I first thought of, or not, I wasn't the one who thought of it, but that I think of, I guess, the one you guys are all, you just copying my idea. No, this idea, I think that many people share, to get to it is it's incremental. And it brings up this other issue that I heard reflected in our earlier conversation about time, and again, I'm going to echo something we had talked about previously about this idea of sitting down with interested folks and saying, okay, let's come up with a plan. And then that plan becomes this trudging process to say, okay, in 5 years, we'll have X goal met. In 10 years, we'll have X goal met. In 60 years, so we're planning out in a time scale that's not really in alignment with what I think is reality for tribal people, where we're really operating in an annual basis, like from this year to the next. And I think that trying to fit this idea and others into a time scale that it's not really a reality, I don't think fits. So that really shoots down my whole idea about we should do things incrementally, but how do we fit that in a year's time? I shot myself in the foot because we can't do it. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And I don't know if everybody shares that sentiment.
Yeah, I think it's vital that we teach in a more like Salish way than just having any old person create a curriculum, because just looking at the curriculum that we have now, it's like it was created by a non-member, a non-speaker. So he was just like a second language speaker. It was really great. Like it really helped a lot of people learn language, but a lot of it was based around like this Western methodology of teaching. And it is problematic because you're not really learning the context of what our traditions are. And if you're not learning in this like kind of immersion way of learning, then it's going to change the language because you're learning it in this very Western sense. And a lot of times too, like Salish spoken verb, object, subject. So it's like running, did Aaron, things like that. So it was all changed around to being like pretty much the verbs at the end. And that wasn't the way that we naturally talked. It was almost always verb first. And so it's great that we have people like Shirley Trahan, some of our elders who have actually gone through and they made sure they did all the corrections to getting it back to being verb first. I think the next steps for me too is I'm wanting to teach and learn, create a curriculum that is based around our yearly round. And so that's kind of what I did with the whole sign language curriculum. Is what it was like composed of. How did we sign? It wasn't just like saying, oh, my name is this, like you were saying, like kind of those basic things. It's more like, well, as an Indigenous person, it seems like we always say who we are. That's like one of the most important things, is saying what tribe you're from. And so that's kind of one of the early on lessons, is like how to say your people. So it's a lot of the neighboring tribes, and there's like verbs and ways to just get to signing, and having something tangible to be able to start communicating right away. And I think it is important to also have those games like I was talking about. So you're really using these signs, and a lot of it was done through trade. So it should be taught that way. It shouldn't just be like, this is the way you make a whiteboard sign, It's like...
What's the sign? What's the sign for a dry erase marker?
Right. See, but I think that's what happens though when you have the language taught in a school. I mean, they teach you how to say chair, and they teach you how to say marker and pen and whiteboard and eraser and all this stuff, right? And so kind of what I was thinking about was, I remember, I think Aaron, you were talking about, or maybe somebody else, but this idea that kind of some like fundamental things that would go along with the culture. I mean, Shandin, you're making all of these conversations we're having start off with song. And so I'm thinking about vocabulary that most people have for songs. I don't think that there's the name for a couple of songs, but not a lot of vocabulary for songs and in music in the curriculum and things like, because ceremony doesn't really fit in school. We don't have vocabulary for that. We don't have a lot of vocabulary for like taking a sweat, and how many students who are trying to learn know how to do this. This is a conversation I was having with my dad. He was really surprised by how younger people who were wanting to learn language and culture, how many of them hadn't had those experiences. And so, I mean, how many, we have a lot of people who do, like, let's say beadwork or food gathering, hunting, you know, all of these things, and finding a way to connect what bits of like this cultural heritage we have that we still practice and language. I mean, that's a context right there.
Right.
And I mean, I'm not sure what you guys think about that or how that would connect, but at least it's, and again, I mean, I'm a teacher, so I'm not trying to like completely tear down schools and say that's really, really bad. But I mean, we're kind of pointing out that it doesn't create the best setting all the time for the kind of language learning we're talking about.
I totally agree. I mean, there's, in the end, you know, there's a lot of ways to learn language. You know, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, they say, you know, but in the end, you've got to still have that commitment and that discipline to get through it. And it's always easier if you have people with you, because language speaking is a social thing, you know, it's purely social. There's no other reason to do it except to communicate with some other human being in that same way, right? And so you want that group, you want that family like that around you moving forward with the language, and that's going to keep you focused on it. And then, however you get there is great. There's people who say, you know, I learned it from the dictionary, or I learned it from this method, or I learned it from that method. I think there's a lot of people learning in a lot of different ways, and we just want to create a world where, you know, there's no excuse not to learn it anymore. Because there's a lot of stuff out there now to use it, you know, whether it's textbooks or the dictionary or the, you know, the immersion settings and camps and all that.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's been a big push to, you know, create a lot of tools, and I think that's good. You know, the more we have, the more options people have to learn, and you know, I've heard a lot about this this dictionary that you guys have been working on over in with the Crow, and I've heard that it's been a pretty useful tool. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about that dictionary.
Yeah, I'm seeing, you know, in the past, you know, the dictionary you're referring to, the online one, is going to change radically in the next couple of months. So I've seen a great amount of success with, you know, what we're doing as far as additions to it. It's going to be on a mobile platform. It's going to be a lot more dynamic in many ways than it currently is. I talked a little bit about the word breakdowns that we're doing with it. So every word will be broken down into its smaller parts, and those will be linkable to its adjoining entry in the dictionary. You know, so you can, you know how Crow words are; they can be like really long. And when I first started looking at this language, it's like so intimidating to see these words because they're like humongous. But once you learn how each one of these little parts, you know, fit in, it just makes it so much easier because you know what those, you know what that little morphemic parts mean. And if you have a dictionary where it's dynamic enough where you can just click on that part of the morpheme breakdown and it'll take you to another entry. It's kind of like, I don't know, when I was a kid, and probably we're all the same with dictionaries. I mean, your English dictionary, I have to say, but I could just spend, you know, hours just browsing through it, and that was a paper dictionary. To me, with like a digital dictionary, it's just even that much deeper because you can just keep clicking into stuff and exploring and going deeper and deeper. You start at this point. Well, I'm going to look up this word, and then hours later, you're going to be looking up all these different words because there's different ways to find them. So I'm just hoping, when this does come out, that it's just going to be a lot. It's just going to be a really just a great aid to the learner. It's not going to replace. It's not going to be the end all of language learning by any means, but it's just going to be another really good tool that there. So for the Crow language. Well, Lakota like that. The Lakota dictionary is very, very robust and has the same type of linkage with how the words break down, and you can click on just a small part of that word, and it'll take you to the entry for that. So it just kind of Will's holding it up. Just kind of explore the language that way and find out, to me it's just one more tool. It's not going to make you fluent, no, but it's going to aid your fluency if you're already doing classes, if you're already in some type of cohort or have some of your peer groups that you're getting together with a couple of hours a day to speak. That's really where it's going to come from, is getting together with other people and trying to speak.
That's really cool, because Salish is a polysynthetic language, so it's just pretty much all these affixes, lexical affixes that are compiled together. So a dictionary like that would just be amazing to have. That way we could break it up.
Aspen, you were talking about did you make like total syntactal changes to your language? Because you're saying it's like verb, object, noun, or verb, noun, but they changed the whole sentence pattern around.
Yeah, I mean, it could occur in like 3 different ways. You could either do the verb, object, subject, subject, object, verb, but the way that it used to be prehistorically was always the verb, object, subject. So yeah, it did get changed around, and then it became like the new normal to have it in kind of like English.
How long ago did they do that?
Let's see, about 8 years ago.
Really? Wow.
Our elders changed, or one of our elders went through and she recorrected a lot of it. And so I was going to write a paper on it saying how this language change occurred because of the way that the sentences are being formatted. But then as I went through the curriculum to kind of cite out of it, I'm like, oh, she changed it in the new version. So it's pretty great.
It was changed in the curriculum, but people didn't actually, elders didn't, they were, obviously they're still speaking the same way they always had.
Yeah, a lot of the elders, they kind of just let people start talking because they were just like, all right, well, you're kind of talking very basic, and so they would just allow this intransitive and wrong formats, even though they didn't really talk like that very often. Yeah.
At first I thought it's something that happened a long time ago when you said that, but
yeah, well, didn't that kind of method or that way of teaching, didn't that start back in the 70s? Is that right? I mean, that's kind of where it started, or is that more recent? Am I not understanding it correctly? Or
yeah, I think that a lot of that was just teaching only vocab, and so it never really got complex enough to really put a whole phrase together, or at least that I know. It seemed like a lot of people were just very basic and they weren't ready for that next step anyway. So there was never any curriculum really made. But yeah, it was made kind of incorrectly.
Yeah. Well, this is probably a good time. We should probably take a little break. Let's listen to this next piece, and then we'll launch into the next bit of our podcast here. I know we're already at 50 minutes in. So let's check this out. Are you guys ready? I know Aaron's ready. He's always ready. Look at him. Game face. Lips are puckered. Yeah. And Will, are you still on the road? Are you still on the road? You look like you're in a hotel room, or has you just got a really good...
Oh yeah, I'm in Vancouver, Canada.
All right. Cool, man. All right, let's listen to this. Here we go. So again, this was Agnes Vanderburg, and she's singing this song that she learned from her Sila, which is her maternal grandfather. His name was Martin, and his last name was Kaltomee, and he was born in 1850s, around that time. So he was kind of around during the tail end of the buffalo hunting days. But this song, apparently the way she describes it was he was one of his saddle horses kind of got hurt, was crippled up pretty bad, so he intended to turn him loose and let him go, let his usefulness was done, I suppose. But I guess later that evening he heard that song coming from the horses, so he went and scoped it out, and sure enough, his old saddle horse was singing that song. And then he told him, that horse told this person would have been my great grandfather, told him that I'm going to be all right, and I'm going to heal up, and we'll travel again. And so eventually that horse did recover. It become one of his best saddle horses, apparently, is the story that goes along with that. But this story and this song are pretty important, and just like in the rest of our podcasts, we've been examining the importance of songs and singing in this research paradigm that we're formulating. And it got me to wonder, and we've talked about it a little bit. We talk about ceremonialism and language, but really how do the powers of our ancestors, which were given for very specific reasons in those days, such as curing ailments and broken bones and diseases that were common. However, we got this new problem, this new dilemma of language loss, traditions of loss, but we really don't have the power or the medicine in a spiritual way to handle that or remedy that. So I'm wondering, from the Language Conservancy folks, if you've encountered, the people you've worked with, speak of that or talk of tying in spirituality to assist with this endeavor. That's kind of my question I wanted to ask to you guys. So if anybody's got commentary, jump on in.
I think it absolutely is a spiritual endeavor. You feel it when you're, every class, every meeting, every event, institute, is done in the right way, started with a prayer or with a song, and the honoring of the elders with a song. And that protocol, just, is injected into every aspect of language learning, and makes the entire endeavor, a way of self-improvement, actually. Language, we use that expression, like language will change your life, and that's part of it, right? And it's not, you don't separate out the spiritual from the pedagogical necessarily. Right. You know what I mean? It's all part of the same effort to become a better person. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, language is just a vehicle for that.
Right. So you're speaking from experience with working with the Lakotas, or is this a specific tribal group, or?
I mean, I think we've worked longest with Lakotas, okay. But we work with about 40 languages all across U.S. and Canada and Australia, and there's a lot of commonalities, of course, and many differences. And as I mentioned, there's there's a whole constellation of issues, when it comes to language, whether it's how much trauma was inflicted on that community, to how well the language was documented, to the number of speakers, and the average age of speakers, and all of those factors. There's a huge number of schools. Do you control your own schools? Do you not? Do you have is there funding available? Many kind of variables in that, and we have to kind of meet the communities where they are with that. And again, addressing those problems on a case-by-case basis. There's not a silver bullet or any single solution out there. There's a whole array of tools and methods that we use when we work with communities. And so, but to your answer, the with Lakotas, it's they're further down the road on that front because of a lot of things that have happened. But at the same time, every community has its strengths. Crow is in a fantastic place because of the relative number of speakers. And so there's other communities out there, of course. Dene and Arizona is in a great place. A few others, Tohono O'odham, and that could have a good chance, and of course others don't. So but in the end, there's a lot of the same things that you all talked about. It's about community, and it's about creating that movement. And even with the smallest group and the smallest language, even for languages that the last speaker died, 20 years ago, that doesn't mean it's it's not impossible to bring it back. You can still do it. And people have done it, and you just have to be super committed to it. It's harder, but you can still do it.
I'm wondering, Will, just to kind of follow up a little bit, have you encountered any of the folks you've worked with where that spirituality and that connection to this kind of a entity of power or what have you, has that never been involved? Like it was completely gone and it was never even a part of the efforts?
I think we as a organization, kind of would always want to support, an indigenous perspective on language, no matter what. And if it doesn't even exist, even if the prayers are in English or if they're Christian prayers, that's fine. It all has to be done one way or another. I think is because again, it's a journey to recover language, and I think those protocols need to be followed.
So I think that with spirituality, it's always included in our language learning and everything that we do. Like, it's kind of part of who we are. And even when we talk about language, one of our elders, Stan Bluff, he mentioned that our language is a spirit, and it's just waiting, on the outside of our doors. And it's a matter of us asking that language spirit to come to us and, give us the ability to speak the language. And so I think we always end up praying and asking that our language comes to us, because to us, it is an animate object. It is an animate spirit that we believe in. And we know that there's like a song to our language, our rhythms. And I try to use that even in my linguistics MA program when I did a paper on Salish syllable structures. And instead of using like the English clapping, Salish and Blackfoot and a lot of native languages, they don't really have that same like rhyme as like English, where it's like every 3 seconds, like camera, like the native or Salish syllables, you kind of follow this like pattern, and there's stressing that's kind of in the middle of the words. And so I ended up using one of the stick game songs, Salish stick game songs, that Wulu song, that we sing at sticking. And so it really helped me go through all of these lists of words. I had like 4 pages of just vocabulary words, and I was finding where the syllable break was, and just singing that song, I was able to whip through that entire like 4 pages within just like that 3 minutes of singing that song, because it just helped really figuring out where those breaks were. And then I also used like our drum, just like the beats of those songs, like that kind of helped figure out kind of the rhythm too. So it was really cool to bring kind of our indigenous perspective, our songs into this like Western setting. And it made our language like rhythms kind of come out, you know. It wasn't that we try to like sing some ABC song or something. Like it's not gonna go well with our language. It's about using our tones, and even like mocking. It's a big thing in, you know, Salish peoples, and just by mocking you could tell where that stressing's at. And so that really kind of shows you those breaks and how our rhythm works. And so that's where that spirituality kind of comes into play with language and pretty much everything we do.
Yeah, we talked about that briefly last time about, and I think Will or I think it was Bob talked about the language and the hip hop, the more hip hop type of songs. And, you know, I'm a firm believer in that idea where if you can get kids to start singing Indian songs with Indian words, by golly, you know, that you're going to catch them. You're going to catch them. By golly, you're going to catch them. You know, we hear a lot of that work done, but like I said in the last episode, it's very nursery rhymey and very non-traditional from a native perspective. So that seems to be the connection that I see between this idea of spirituality and how we can use that, you know, the power of our ancestors, which seemed to be pretty effective in those days in that context. But you know, how do we use those same gifts today? Of course, there's a long process even to gain those kind of gifts, but how do we use those in a modern context to handle issues such as this? And I don't know if it's suited to do that, but I really see that, like Will was saying, they're very well associated across the tribes he's worked with, where spirituality and language learning are very closely matched, just intuitively, I think. And that makes sense because I see it as a, you know, as an answering or a calling, as our ancestors or our elders would say, you know, that you get a calling to do something. It's not just you. There's something behind it, something pushing you to do that. And so I really see that as something, as an effective tool, but really getting our young people to be proficient and knowledgeable in culture, even without language, I think is equally as important, because then that's kind of the hook. And we've talked about that before. So pairing these two, and even pairing the cultural learning or the tradition learning without language, I think should be equally important, because I think that's the pathway to the desire to know more. And I don't know if you've guys seen that happen, or that kind of process unfold in your work. Yeah, that's where you jump in and say, "Oh yeah, I have jokes."
Yeah,
I think Bob needs to.
I cut it out in the podcast, but go ahead, go.
I was gonna say, especially like when people first start going like to our medicine dances, our winter dances, like, you know, they feel something and they get inspired by it, and they might not know the language at that time, you know, but they're wanting to learn about the culture, and then with time they end up wanting to learn about the language. So I think you're right on that. Like, as long as they get introduced to it, they're going to feel that like sense of belonging to our culture. And I think that's just going to help them to want more. So.
Yeah. So I'm wondering then, Will and Bob, if you've seen a resurgence, a pairing of resurgence in ceremonialism along with the progress in language learning, or do you have any experience in that area?
Yeah. So of course, you know, I think it's like a cart and horse a little bit at the boat. You know, it's like push and pull. Like there's been a huge resurgence in Sundance and Lakota country, you know, from early 70s, where there were just one or two, Frank Fool's Crow and several others that had theirs, and then now there's hundreds.
Wow.
And I think, as people get, part of that community, they, want to be able to pray and do all of that in the language. So it becomes part of the motivating factor for languages. Aspen and other people talked about. There's even a Sundance there that you're not even allowed to use English at all, right? And there's no non-members allowed at all either, of course.
Yeah.
And then, so there's some more strict ones, and I think for those strict ones, there's even another motivation, right? Hey, they're not even going to let me in unless I can say my prayer, in language. So I think it's a little bit of that as well, and learning the songs is, just a wonderful way of, doing that. And I think that, it's a big motivating factor.
Right. Bob, what about you? Have you had an experience in that area, or you see that as a trend?
Just from talking to other people, from hearing, just from some of the things that Aaron's told me, and I'm not out in the field quite as much as Will is, so he sees a lot more, but I do think that it has become more of a popular thing and more of a trend, and I think it's really necessary for that to continue. To keep that language growing.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I see that reflected here too, where we're from, is we see that trend of people leaning toward or feeling that responsibility to use the language more, especially in that ceremonial context. And I think that really wraps back around to what Aaron was talking about, this Pentecostalism, and I don't know if the folks who are involved in that feel that same urge, or maybe it's just so prevalent in that they feel like they have to speak the language in those contexts. But so Kamia or Aspen, you have anything additional to add to that particular question? I know we've talked about this quite a bit, about the resurgence of spirituality, but how do you think that should play a role, or how it can further a role in language learning, besides what you've already said?
I think with me as a teacher, I've noticed that that you don't really want to teach the wrong context either, with these songs. And so you wouldn't want to just start singing a jump dance song, even if it's during kind of the winter time and in a classroom settings, because then it's just, it's making them think oh, we could jump around and this is what this song's for. But it's you really need to have that context of being there at the longhouse or wherever it is, and all these protocols. So I try not to use too many spiritual songs there, if it's more of stick game powwow, I think it's good, or just kind of going based off of our genre of how we have our beats and what types of songs they are, and then creating songs for certain things that I'm teaching. So about the Bitterroot dig, instead of using some English song, I try to use a powwow type song, and then just adding in language of we're going out to go dig bitterroot. We're going to dig up this bitterroot. We need to clean it. So there's 4 verses to the song that's talking about going out to get the bitterroot, digging it, cleaning it, drying it, and put it away. And so it's still kind of keeping sort of that integrity of how we sing songs, the tones of it, our beats.
Right.
But yeah, it's not taking an actual song that already has significance and bringing it into a classroom setting.
Right. So I don't think you see Sundance classes in Lakota territory, right? Yeah. Not, go ahead.
Not at all. But again, there's a language for I think there's every and I agree, obviously with Aspen, I don't think there's any schools or instructors that are going to be teaching those things. But they go to find mentors and find people to help them with that, and that's how they make that social connection to language outside of a school setting. So that wraps back around to this idea of, man, how do we
How do we get it depart it from this idea of the school to where, yeah, that is the thing. It's not a Sundance class, but it's preparing for that thing. But I don't know. Then you think, well, it has to be formalized in some way. But I don't know. Does it? I don't know. Whenever I think about this,
beat.
Yeah, go ahead. What?
I said, yeah, I think like you could teach the beat of like jump dance songs, and like you could kind of let them sort of jump around to a different type of song, and like they're like, oh, this is like kind of what we do, and we like hear this beat, you know, like it's kind of preparing them to like go to jump dance.
Right. What are you doing there, Aaron? Folding clothes? Did you get in trouble? He's folding clothes. He can't even hear me. He's folding clothes. Cripes.
But, one of the interesting things that I've seen is like, people like buying the tapes or the CDs of the different songs.
Yeah.
Studying them, and learning the songs from that and reading the liner notes and all of that, I think is a common trend.
Yeah.
And particularly in some communities, I've noticed there's like a very popular singer that, did a CD or a song of, sacred songs. And it's over the course of 25 years, you hear a lot of variation in how that song is sung.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to hear when people are learning it from tapes and CDs and things like that, how they all start to align to how this one person sings that song, right? And then it's kind of like a whole, you know what I mean? There's like someone mentioned that everyone, there's a way of, if you just speak like one person, well, you can also sing like one person, right?
Right.
That has an impact also on the community, but yet it's a multiplier, learning, a CD or a song that's, on a thing is a multiplier. There's thousands of people who have listened to that, just like literature is a multiplier.
Yeah. Well, Aaron confirmed, yes, he is folding clothes. So I think this might be a good time to wrap it up. If we got Aaron doing chores while we're recording a podcast, let's unless anybody's got any final thoughts.
I think one thing Will mentioned earlier about English being just so pervasive everywhere, it's on the radio, it's on television, it's in the stores you go to. I'm thinking back about socialization and learning a language. And, of course I learned it from my parents and from school, but I also learned a lot of English from television and from radio. And I just don't know. I mean, I think there just needs to be that immersion in other ways than just school, and other ways to be just family or ceremony. And I'm not sure how to, that's just one way to just, to make it pervasive. And I don't know how to get certain languages to that point,
Yeah, that's the.
On that level, I mean, as far as it's like having radio stations where it's just all in the language, or.
Well, like language is, you got to express everything in language. You got to express the profane and the sacred. You got to be able to do it all, right?
Yeah.
Right. Dirty jokes and prayers, right? The whole thing.
Yeah.
And, at the same time, and it can do it all, right?
Yeah.
We can't just pigeonhole the language as just one thing. It's got to do it all. It's got to be able to do the economics. It's got to do the politics. It's got to do the gossip, the jokes, the stories, the new and the old, all of that. Yeah. And I don't know, like, countries that have been able to succeed in doing it would, like you look at Israel, it's like there was a law, right, that says you cannot have any sign except in Hebrew. You can't, you're not going to go into politics except with Hebrew. You're not going to, we're going to basically ban every other language, right? A pretty harsh set of rules. And, technically, a reservation community could do something like that down the road, but everyone's got to be ready for that.
Right.
But it takes a kind of a heavy duty level of policy and everyone behind it, and it becomes a movement. The Hebrew came back with a movement called Zionism, right, which was that whole idea that they were chosen people and that they're going to live according to the traditional ways, and it became a strong motivating factor that way. And I think a lot of people need to, at least a majority, need to be there in order for those kind of who would give up American or English television at this point, or social media, or going to movies, or newspapers, or magazine, or any of that, right? Who's ready to give that up yet? People need to be at a point ready to give that up, or at least be able to mitigate it somehow, so you can still have a safe place for your language.
Right. Some bootleg Netflix.
Right. Yeah. So sneaking in and watching.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good way to end this recording here. Unless Aspen or Kamia have anything else to add, we can wrap her up for the night. Kamia, you good? Still there?
Oh yeah, I'm good.
Okay. I know Aaron got the boot. His internet failed him. So, but thanks again, you guys, Will and Bob. We really appreciate you guys taking the time, and we're going to spread the word about your guys' work. Hopefully we can tie you into some folks that we know would be interested in the things you do. And, man, we need you here too. We need you here. Will, come on over across the border. Help us out.
Thanks.
Yeah. So a lot of work, and I think you guys know that more than anybody. So again, thanks. And also thanks, Aspen, for taking the time out to join us. Plenty more to talk about, issues of language learning here locally. So hopefully we'll have you back, and we'll get some other folks in who've been involved in this effort, and we can have a nice little cry session about where we're at. I don't know if we'll cry about it, but anyway. All right. Thank you for joining us on this episode. And to learn more, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at IRCSKC. You can find us also on Facebook and YouTube by searching SKC Indigenous Research Center. You can also visit our website at irc.skc.edu. Don't forget to join us next time as we continue our discussions on Indigenous research, Indigenous research methodologies, and Indigenous worldviews.